Hey there guys, we're taking a look at Star Wars Empire at War, Forces of Corruption, running on the AMD Ryzen 5 5500U. Now this is a classic Star Wars RTS that is very near and dear to my heart. I pretty much just grew up playing this a crap ton and actually originally got my start on YouTube playing this game. I actually had a channel that I managed to grow up to almost 2,000 subscribers where I would just do let's plays of this game with different mods and stuff. And here you see the base game running, and this is the overworld of it. If you've never played this game, I would honestly recommend playing it if you are a huge fan of Star Wars, because it is pretty much the best Star Wars RTS that we've ever gotten. It's pretty fantastic, and it's old enough that it runs really well. At least the base game does run really well on hardware like this, and there's still a lot of fun to be had. In fact, the FPS that we were getting here was so high a lot of the time that you will see little glitches that happen that pretty much was only on the capture card on the actual display of the laptop itself. Everything was perfectly fine, but we were just getting such a high FPS that it was really tripping up my capture card. So you'll see those little like staticky artifacts there. Those are not present while playing the game on the actual laptop itself. It is only through the capture card that they show up. And you'll see here that in actual combat, the level of performance that we get is pretty reasonable. You will see dips in the 1% lows and things like that as things load in and happen, but this being an RTS game that is relatively slow pace in comparison to most RTS games, it's actually very doable and very playable, especially if you pay attention to the frame time charts. They're very smooth and consistent for most of the overall experience, and you'll see that overall the 1% lows will end up recovering over time. Of course, it all depends on what you have going on in the screen though, because you do have like camera views where you can see things from different angles. Now this is currently running right now with what is the default in-game settings for me, which was essentially a mixture of medium and high. It is not the maximum graphic settings. I pretty much just went with whatever the game defaulted to just to jump in and actually play it, and I was just getting such a good experience on it that overall I didn't feel the need to change anything, especially because I was worried that changing anything might actually affect the 1% lows. But this is the experience of playing the game in its base form, which honestly I would say that it's not really what's going to bring you back to this game. The main reason that I continued to play this game for what was essentially 10 years before I pretty much stopped doing this on YouTube was just the fact that it has an extensive modding community, and the mods for it are insanely good. Let me show you my favorite one. So this is Star Wars Empire at War, Thrawns Revenge. It is a gigantic rework mod that changes so many aspects of this game. It might as well be a sequel that we never got. It adds in so many more planets, so many more different factions, so many more different ships, so much more to do, so many new game mechanics. It is such a huge rework, and you'll see that all of this ends up actually affecting the performance, but not to a level that brings down the overall experience. Certainly in the overworld here where you can see the galactic map, it's not amazing levels of performance, but you'll see things level out as things just finish loading, and there's just so much going on. There's so many different planets. There's so much to do here. It is such a huge mod that I would really recommend that you give it a try, because this is exactly the kind of stuff that these systems are really great at, letting you play these older titles that have really extensive modding communities, and you get a lot of gameplay out of this for what is essentially not really that much of a demanding experience. There's a lot of fun to be had. I mean, up until pretty much 2021, I was still doing things with this game on YouTube, and I was still playing it very regularly. But let me actually jump into some gameplay so you could see how different it is from the base game. And here you could see we're actually in the game itself. What the mod actually lets you do is just have significantly larger fleets, significantly larger battles. There's reworked effects for everything. It really is just a complete redoing of the game. And it is going to be a bit more demanding than the actual base game itself, but not by a significant margin. It's still really playable. And there is so much fun to be had here, especially if you're just a huge Star Wars fan. I mean, I loved Star Wars at this point in my life, it was just like my obsession. At this point, I've fallen out of love from Star Wars just because I'm not a fan of how Disney has managed a lot of it, especially the TV shows. They, to me, are just so bad that like it killed a lot of the hype I had for Star Wars in general. But there's still so much good content out there, especially when it relates to the legacy Star Wars stuff, that is just so worth going back and playing, that I think that if you're looking for a game to actually have some fun with on this chip, this is it. This is a fantastic game to play. There's not a lot of depth to the combat, though the rework of the mod does give it a little bit more depth. It has a lot more game mechanics that you normally would only associate with like 4X type games, because really overall the base game itself is very simplistic, extremely simplistic. But the mod does give it a lot more depth, but it is one of those things where it's a lot more depth in comparison to what was already a very shallow overall experience. So I wouldn't go into this expecting something grandiose or anything like that, but it is going to be the best Star Wars experience that you could find on an RTS game right now. Even Sins of a Solar Empire, which also has some really popular Star Wars mods, does not compete with the level of depth that you get out of this. And if you look at the power usage that we get while playing this, we're not even utilizing the full 15 watts most of the time. This is just running at stock, and we're not even hitting the 15 because it doesn't need it. The game is old enough and so single-threaded. Like, you'll see that the CPU is actually just at the full 4 gigahertz speed pretty much the entirety of the time. The reason being is that the game is super single-threaded. It's why we're only seeing like a peak of like what, 16% CPU utilization. That is just one core that is doing everything. So it doesn't even need the full 15 watts to boost up the GPU, because it doesn't need that much GPU most of the time, and it can't really do anything multi-threaded. I mean, the game itself is pretty old. I think it's from like 2006. So at this point, single core, or rather single-threaded games, were still extremely common. No one was programming games to be multi-threaded because of the fact that it really just was not something that had a lot of high demand. A lot of people were still rocking dual-core CPUs at this time. Quad cores were barely really starting to find any footing whatsoever. So it really just was a completely different time. But that does actually lead to us being able to get really great levels of performance on this hardware that is not that powerful, and it doesn't need to be. It doesn't need to be powerful for you to get a really good gaming experience here. Because, I mean, I would play this game on my desktop that, you know, chugs down like almost 200 watts, barely doing anything, when I could just play this on this system that is running with a 15 watt TDP at max, not even hitting that at most. So measured at the wall, I'd be shocked if we're using more than like 30 watts for this whole laptop right now. I should actually hook up the watt meter and measure it out in different games, but you'll see that the overall performance that we get is just really rock solid. There is, of course, also the ground combat, where you get a lot of units. And really, overall, I'm not the biggest fan of the ground combat in general of this game. It was always my least favorite aspect of it, just because the space combat is cool because you get to use spaceship, but having these slow-moving infantry roam around isn't exactly the greatest thing. But the reworked mod here really does a lot to try to improve the overall experience of playing this game in a reasonable way, because I would really argue that the ground combat is pretty bad in the base game, and here it makes it very bearable. And that's honestly a pretty major compliment, considering that I really thought that the ground combat was pretty damn bad in the base game. It was always my least favorite thing. It was always just the biggest drag, and I always appreciated mods that kind of just completely got rid of it, because a lot of people just weren't fans of it. This one doesn't do that, but I'm okay with that just because the ground combat is at least reasonable enough to be playable. So really, overall, I just wanted to kind of highlight this game that runs really well on this system, and I think that you guys should give it a go if you're a fan of Star Wars and want to have a good gaming experience here. You can always turn up the graphics settings to the maximum if you want. I kind of just went with what it defaulted to, which was a mixture of pretty much the like low and medium settings. But overall, I was very happy to play this, and I honestly actually ended up sitting here playing it quite a lot. It was just mostly the reason why I chose to make this video, really, because I kind of wanted to justify why I sat here playing this game for about 4 hours. It was just one of those things where I love these types of games, and I'm such a huge fan of the Star Wars aesthetic that any game that lets me play something like this is just going to be great, where you can control different units, especially when it comes to the space combat. The space combat is what I love the most, and you get some really, really cool units out of this. There are so many different, like, high-level superstar destroyers that you can make. There's so many different factions. It's one of those things where I cannot shill this mod enough to you, really. So I'm going to leave a link to the mod down below. Obviously, you can pick this game up on Steam, and it's, I think, available in a wide variety of different key resellers and stuff like that. So I would honestly pick this up if it's on sale. If you're someone that's looking for an RTS that you can play on this system really, really well, and you are actually going to be able to play this on the battery. Now, obviously, it's going to burn through your battery a lot quicker than if you were just web browsing, but it isn't one of those situations where you need to turn up the TDP to get a good gaming experience, because you don't even really need the full 15-watt TDP. So you're going to get a very playable experience out of this. And you can see here just the ground combat. It's a little slow and stuff like that, but it does also make this a really good game to play on a system that is like a laptop, because you don't have a high refresh rate display. Not that you really need it, but there's a lot of games like StarCraft that are RTSs that kind of require you to have a lot of input into them. You know, there's a huge emphasis on speed when it comes to the more competitive aspects of it. Now, obviously, you're going to be playing this single player, but something like the single player in a game like StarCraft is a little different, where here there is a galactic map. You are going through capturing planets and stuff like that. So it's an RTS mixed with a 4X type of game, and that is completely up my alley, and I wish that this genre was not dead. But overall, I recommend you pick this up. I'm going to leave a link down below for the Steam page for this mod, as well as some of the other ones that I have played. So if you want to try out some different things, you can. There are some that let you play in the Clone Wars era. There's some that let you play in the Old Republic era. It pretty much has a gigantic modding community that is still active to this day. So in general, check it out. I hope you found this video useful. Let me know if you have ever played this game before. I love talking to people that have played this, because amongst my friend group, it's just one of those things where it's like no one can relate to that. But I would just sink so many hours as a kid playing this. Like, it's just so good. I'm actually thinking of maybe streaming this playing on here just to give myself an excuse to, you know, play more of this. So if you're interested in seeing that, let me know down below. And again, any artifacting that you see happening on the screen like that is completely just the capture card not being able to handle the high refresh rate that this was running at. But anyways, I will see you guys in the next one.